Welcome to Step Into a Story. I have no idea which episode we're on, but we are here with Ally Machate, correct? Okay. I did listen to one of your other interviews and I heard him say, and I was thinking that's a lot like machete, but not quite. So that helped me remember. Yeah, I find last names fascinating. Where is yours from?
It's my husband's, but it is supposedly an old Portuguese converso name.
Oh, really? Okay. Very interesting. We have a man who I believe is from Portugal in our church. And so his name is very Portuguese and I could not pronounce it. It's the Portuguese equivalent of John Paul, which is my son's name, but I don't think I could pronounce it quite right, the Portuguese version. So anyway, welcome to Step Into a Story. It's a delight to have you here. And as an author, I'm looking forward to your advice. And I saw that normally people have to pay a pretty decent price for your advice. So I'm thrilled to be here with you. So give my audience a little bit of a background about who you are and what you do.
Yeah, absolutely. I am the consummate book nerd. I have been a huge fan of books and writing ever since I was very, very young. My mother loves to tell people how I was so impatient as a toddler that they wouldn't just read to me all the time. You know, they had other things to do. I was really not okay with that. So I started teaching myself to read, and I was reading independently about the age of 3.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
You know, I have to ask, when I read that on your site, how does a 3-year-old teach themselves to read? Was it by looking at the letters as people read to you?
Well, I certainly didn't teach myself fully. I just started trying to learn. And obviously, I don't remember this. This is all founded by my parents. But my mother was an elementary school teacher. So she had, you know, the skill set, and recognized that I was trying to figure out. I was trying to connect sounds to what I saw on the page. And I would remember the stories because I had them read them to me over and over again. So I was trying to figure it out. And when she saw that, she dove in and she helped me and really taught me to read. I certainly didn't teach myself alone.
Okay. Still, that's quite an accomplishment at the age of 3 to be able to read.
I was just that passionate. I just really loved books. And, you know, I went from there to making little construction paper books, you know, crayons and markers, and I would give them to people and I would tell people that I was a book publisher. So I was
that's so cool.
Yeah, I was very conscious of that world and very interested at a very young age.
I did somewhat the same thing, not from quite that young an age, but here's one of my early publications. It is called The Night the Sea Turtle Went Down, which you can barely read it anymore. And I think this is from about 4th or 5th grade. I literally have not opened this jar in 30 years. But the idea was that it was the story of, you know, people on a boat that went down and they're stranded. And so, of course, they put their story in a jar. And so instead of turning in the book like everybody else did, this is how I handed it in for the assignment.
That's awesome. That's awesome. I love that. I love that.
Yeah, I've loved writing since I was quite young too. So it's pretty amazing. And so what do you do now?
So it, you know, that through line and that passion really continued all through my academic career. I was always known as the big reader. You know, teachers were always giving me books, and I was an English major. I was on the school newspaper and the literary magazine, you know, all the typical stuff. I went to college. I majored in English literature and creative writing. And of course, that's when I started to get some real experience. I started my first freelance job for pay. I was writing for an online website, and I got my first internship at a small regional publisher, which ultimately the combination of those two things helped me to land my first job when I graduated at Simon & Schuster, which a lot of people I'm sure will recognize as one of the big 5 publishers. And I really got my chops there and learned so much about the industry.
So what was your job at Simon & Schuster?
I was an acquiring editor, and I was an assistant first to two editors, which was a really interesting position to be in because one of them went out on maternity leave within just a couple of months of me starting. And I ended up managing her list sort of from afar for her while she was out, not editing all of her projects, of course, but, just starting to get involved in the production part of the process and ushering things through. After I was there a little while, I did get to do a couple of, final edits on some projects that she already worked through. So I got thrown in really early to the mix. And then when she decided not to come back, I stayed with the editor who I had been assigned with. As she progressed, she became an executive editor and she moved up in the business. And I started to build my own list and acquire my own titles alongside of that.
Okay. So being the assistant to the editor, were you sort of the first pair of eyes to read through the slush pile, or what did you do exactly?
Yeah, many times. So when you are an editorial assistant, your jobs are pretty varied. It is, of course, to be an assistant to that editor. I was very lucky in the sense that pretty much everybody, the corporate culture at the time when I was there, was really generous and supportive of its young people. I had peers at other companies who, it was a real like Devil Wears Prada situation where they were being asked to like get dry cleaning and pick up kids and, do all that crazy stuff. I never had to do any of that kind of crazy stuff.
I worked in a place like that, and kind of a side note, but the work environment is so important based on the people. When I took a semester off college. Actually, I didn't. I just did the semester at a different college. And I worked 2 temp jobs during that time. One was so nice to me. They were just, and I think it was even the owner of the company. I'm positive it was. And I was pregnant at the time. And when it was time for me to leave, and there was a fly buzzing around, and the baby was born in Ireland. The baby's now much older than a baby. But when it was time for me to leave, they gave me a basket with flowers and they were so nice to me. And then I worked at another, it was like a clothing kind of showroom warehouse in Minneapolis. And they were more like that. They were more like, hey, you peons, could you go do this for me? Go do that for me. I want this done. I was like, that's not really my job. And they would come in at 10, take a lunch break at 11:30, get back from lunch around 1, leave for the day about 3, and order us around the rest of the time. So.
Yeah, no, I was really incredibly lucky. I mean, not only did I not have to deal with that kind of stuff, but you're right, the environment is everything. And because people were so supportive and generous with their time, and even the company as a whole was like that at the time. A woman named Carolyn Reedy, who has since passed very sadly, and has a really big reputation and a really wonderful reputation in publishing. She was I think she was the CEO at the time. I think that was her official. She was the boss. She was the big boss. And she ran a program that was specifically designed to make sure everybody in the company understood the full ecosystem in which they were working. And so every couple of months, she would invite people from different departments to come together. Everyone would come it was open invite, and you would come to the conference room, and she would have a different person from a different department over the course of several weeks present to everybody who was there to explain their role and their piece of the overall book's journey. And as a young person in publishing, it was just an incredibly eye-opening experience to really understand how all the other pieces fit and how all the other departments work together, and to meet people, also from other departments and forge those relationships. So that combined with, my boss, my editor-in-chief, the head of our department, they encouraged us to review submissions, to talk to agents, to go to events, to go to networking events or launch events, to really just dive in with both feet. And it was because of that environment and all of that support that I was able to acquire my first book before I had even been there a year, which was kind of a remarkable milestone that a lot of people didn't get to. And I can't imagine that happening at many other places.
Right. So you have now since left, or you don't work in major publishing anymore. You're solely your own boss now, right?
Correct.
And so what do you do for writers?
So I left big publishing after the industry kind of contracted. We had the dot-com bust. We had 9/11, which was very devastating for New York, not just, the, the obvious ways, but also a lot of people left and a lot of businesses closed or shrunk. The money was flowing very differently. So we had a lot of layoffs in our company, and the situation just kind of became untenable. I didn't lose my job, but I was inheriting the projects from all the editors who were leaving.
Mhm.
And I was almost done with a master's degree, which I had been going to part-time for some time. And so all of those things kind of combined. And I thought, you know what, let me step away. Let me go to school full time. I'll do a little freelancing on the side. I'll give the industry a chance to settle. I'll give New York a chance to settle. And, I'll come back in a year or so, and, maybe things will be opening back up again. There'll be more positions, more opportunity, and so on. And I just loved freelancing so much. And I loved working directly with the authors so much. So what that looked like in the beginning, I did a lot of developmental editing, which is the same kind of editing I was doing as an acquiring editor at Simon Schuster, really making sure that books were reaching their fullest potential. I did a lot of book doctoring and ghostwriting for large agents and for almost all of the major publishers. So I got to be on the other side. I got to be working
Right.
on
And I'm
all.
sure it helped a lot that you had done all that networking. And I think that's a thing that so many people don't really understand, is how important networking really is.
Oh, yeah.
And I have to say, I was one of them. I was kind of raised with this idea, work hard and you'll soar to the top. And bit by bit, I realized I'm not sure that really is true. You working hard is good. Don't get me wrong. But it works especially well if you happen to know somebody
Yes.
who's chief executive of a publishing company, for instance.
Oh, absolutely. My very first freelancing jobs all came directly from not only my department. When I left, I worked out a deal, so I was able to freelance to finish up some of the projects that I had acquired while I was on staff. But also, just like you said, contacts, agents I had known, other people I had met at other houses, friends I had made who had moved on to other houses. Those were my earliest sources of freelance work for sure. And as time went by and I did more and more work, we started to see print on demand publishing, POD publishing becoming much more available and viable. And then, of course, a few
And
more years
accepted.
and accepted. And then not too long after that, we had ebooks, starting to come out. So the landscape really changed dramatically. And I found that a lot of the authors that were finding me for editing work needed a lot more. They were more interested in self-publishing. They wanted to do it well, and they didn't know what they didn't know. So I started cobbling together a referral network of designers and marketers and website builders and people like that. And eventually it just made more sense, the volume that I was doing, to build my own team. And so the Writers Ally was born.
Very nice. Now, talk a little bit about the different types of editing. You mentioned developmental editing, book doctoring, and what are some of the other kinds of editing you do?
Yeah, so I'll talk about it in terms of the journey a manuscript goes through. So, of course, if you've heard of ghostwriting, you know that a ghostwriter helps you to write the book. That might look at different ways. And that's usually for people who aren't able to write the books themselves. It's a very expensive, very intensive process. Usually it's high profile celebrities or business people who are, just too busy, but they need that book. So, there's
I'm actually sort of, in theory, I wonder if that book is here. I've got a stack of books like that high. Actually, I've got like 5 or 6 stacks each that high, all over everything. I'm actually sort of in the middle of ghostwriting with someone right now. We did 221 BC, and his reasons are, it's interesting to see how people come to that. He's not a celebrity, but he started writing this book, and he's married to the little girl I used to babysit, who's now in her 40s. But got to quit thinking of her as that. And she said, ask Laura to help you, because he just, he'd never written a book. And his process is unique. He plays a game of D&D, and then he creates this wonderful fantasy tale of time travel and this search for these magical amulets. And he worked it all perfectly into Egyptian history, ancient history of the year 221 BC. So I didn't think of myself as a ghostwriter, though, because he actually was kind enough to put my name on the cover. So,
Well,
for me,
that puts you more squarely into the category of collaborator.
okay, yeah. Well, it is an interesting process, and I was actually surprised to hear you say that it's helping, because I thought that a ghostwriter wrote the entire book themselves, or is it kind of a spectrum?
It is a spectrum. It depends a little bit on the ghost. It depends a little bit on the author. But no ghostwriter is 100% able to write the book for you, right? Like the ideas are coming from you. The expertise or the
Yep.
experience, if it's nonfiction, are coming from you. So the heavy lifting is certainly done by the ghostwriter. Most common, it's usually a series of interviews, and then the ghostwriter takes the interviews and writes the book based on that. And there's some back and forth. So yes, they do write the book for you, but it's not like go away and come back with a book, and like,
right. You have to give something, unlike AI, where you say, hey, write me a book, and it does. It's kind of frightening.
Exactly. So that's, the most intensive thing. Book doctoring would come after that. So book doctoring is where a draft is finished. Usually book doctors like me are hired by publishers or agents where a project has already been under contract and the draft comes in and it's just not as strong as they hoped it would be. Maybe the author should have had a ghostwriter, but didn't. Maybe, for whatever reason, the draft that has come in is just too rough and it needs more than just a little bit of editing, which is why we say book doctoring. So you kind of get in there with your hands and you're actually cutting and pasting and moving. And there's a little bit of ghostwriting involved because you're filling in the gaps and you're writing transitions. It's really like major surgery compared to what it would be. So that's book doctoring. Developmental editing comes next. Now, this is not what most people think of, but what most people need. Most authors start or should start with developmental editing. And that is the round where your editor is reading through the book completely and giving you feedback on the big picture elements. So we're not talking about spelling and punctuation. We're talking about, does your plot evolve at a pace that's engaging? Does it make sense? Is it built for the right audience, right? If you're saying you're writing a romance novel, is it hitting all the right tropes for a romance novel? Is your dialogue interesting? If it's nonfiction, is the journey that you're taking your reader on, the transformative journey, clear and compelling? Does it solve a problem? Who exactly is the book for? So all these really big, important questions.
I have to tell you a funny story along those lines. I know of somebody who was writing a romance, was writing it for years, got too much feedback from too many people. But because this person happened to be more of a technical writer who wanted to write romance, she gave all these specifications for this tractor. And so my husband happened to be one of the people who read it. And he's like, I love this book, but not for the reasons you want me to. I was so excited by the specs on that tractor. I want one in my home.
Well, that's a great example of why it's so important to choose beta readers who represent your actual target audience.
Yes. Yeah. So you don't get the feedback, that was the best book ever, and not get the rest of it because I love that tractor.
Oh, that's funny. That is really funny. Yeah, so that's developmental editing. And, that often goes through a number of passes, a number of rounds and substantive revisions. Totally depends on the book and the project. It could be a few months. It could be years, whatever it takes. Once the book has reached essentially its final form, the book is what it is. Then we get into the polishing and production stage. That's copy editing. Copy editing is what most authors think editing is. And unfortunately, they'll skip the developmental part and try to go straight for copy editing. Most good copy editors, when they get a project like that, will tell them, no, you need to go back and get this developmentally edited first. Copy editing is most easily understood through the acronym PUGS: punctuation, usage, grammar, and style. I would also add that it looks at things like consistency and clarity. so
Yeah.
that the little details, continuity, like we talk about
Right.
with TV shows, happens
You
in
know, and
books.
that's something so few authors think about. Because I run a small publishing company, I've done read throughs. Most of the authors are really very, very good. But I do run into things like, for instance, I don't think he'll mind me giving a plug for his book because I think it's one of the best books I've ever read. It's called The Feet Say Run by Dan Blum. Everybody should go out and buy it. And so I've done my marketing for him. I'll do more, Dan. Um, and it's a really, really good book. He's got an interesting publishing story. But as I was reading through, it's the story of Hans Jaeger, and it starts when he's 13 in pre-war Germany, and it goes up until he's maybe 85 or so, and he's stranded on an island, the last island that GPS apparently can't find, as we had to say in the book, given the year it was written. Um, and I noticed inconsistencies in the age. And it's like, well, wait a second, if that's his first wife, he didn't get married till he's 50. And wait a second, he was 13 in pre-war Germany and now he's only 60.
Exactly.
What happened? And I'm not making fun of him at all. As I said, it's a wonderful book, but it is so, so, so easy for authors to do that, in part because we're looking at this swath of time. I don't think my hands fit in the frame. Imagine they're like 50 feet apart.
Yeah.
That we're writing the story over, and you might set it aside for a couple weeks because, like in my case, a ram ran over me or whatever. And actually, I was absolutely fine, amazingly. But, things happen. You get back to it and you forget those details.
Yep.
And it really, I think for most people, does take a second set of eyes to see that.
Yeah, absolutely. So copy editors, if you're hiring a copy editor, they should be taking care of those kinds of details. They should be flagging for you if your character changes hair color 3 times, if the story, the details of the ages, even in a nonfiction
Right.
book, if you are capitalizing something in some contexts, but not in others. Like maybe you have a proprietary term that you use in your business, or you're telling different anecdotes about clients and the details aren't lining up. Copy editors are going to catch that in addition to the very basic kind of spelling, punctuation stuff most people think of. So it's a really essential piece of the cleanup and an essential piece of making sure the book reads and looks professionally when it's published. And then there's one more type. So once that manuscript then goes into production, it gets designed, it gets laid out. We get ultimately usually a PDF file that represents what the print book will look like, and that becomes converted into a file for the ebook. Once all of that is done, we have the last type of editing, which is called proofreading. Now, a lot of people mistakenly refer to copy editing as proofreading, but when you're talking about book production, it's very important to understand the distinction, because proofreading, as the name implies, is specifically done on page proofs. It's done on the designed pages of your book. And that's important because it's not just looking at any errors that have slipped through the editing process, which it is looking to catch those, but it's also looking at things like, is the font used properly and consistently, right? You want to make sure that chapter 11 doesn't suddenly have a different font from all the other chapters. You want to make sure that your page numbers are consecutive in the way that they're supposed to be. You don't have 2 page 10s. They're making sure the front matter is appropriate, the back matter is appropriate. So they're looking at all of the design and layout elements, as well as making sure there aren't any lingering errors like a dropped period or a misspelled word somewhere. So proofreading, if it isn't happening on proof pages, it's really just copy editing.
Okay. And I've always found it interesting that for some reason on the printed page, things seem to jump out at us more. Do you find that? Or, okay, so it's not just me.
No, and there's actually a biological reason for that, and it's sort of similar to what you, I think you said this earlier. Maybe it was another conversation. I've talked to so many people today, but it's the same function that causes problems sometimes when you read something back and you realize that you thought you wrote a certain thing and it's not actually there on the page. So your brain is designed to function in certain ways, and sometimes those ways can work against us. And this is an example of that, where you can read something, you can read it out loud, You can record it and have it played back to you, or have someone read it to you, and you will notice different things in all three versions of that approach, because different parts of your brain are activated depending on the input. The part of your brain that you use to read is not precisely the same as the part of your brain that you use to listen, right? It's not precisely the part of your brain that you use to speak. So looking at a manuscript and going through it those different ways will always help you to spot more and different things than just one review will.
Right. I like the idea of listening, especially the author I just published the most recent book for, Rebecca May Hope. She just did two with me. Oh, Matilda's Eden was the second one that just came out. And that's what she does in part. She does most of her own editing. You know, I have high faith in her. So I do look over it. But one of the things she does is record it and read it back, or have the computer read it to her. And then she starts catching things.
Yep.
And she's a very, very good writer. And, you know, but I think everybody misses something. It's, you know, we expect, we know the story in our heads. So we expect and we look at it. In fact, it reminds me, did you ever see this video where it tells you count the number of basketballs, or, you know, how many times you see these girls shoot the basketball, something like this? And it's these two teams running back and forth with multiple basketballs. And you get to the end, you're so carefully counting up all the basketballs, you get to the end and it says, and how many polar bears walked across the basketball court?
Right.
And have you seen that one?
I have, yeah, or something like that.
It's shocking. When I saw that, I was like, no, this is a trick. I went back and watched, like, how do you miss a polar bear walking through a basketball game? And yet you do, because you're so focused on the ball. And I think the same thing happens when we're editing our own work, or, you know, anything in life. We get stuck on what we expect to see, and then we do see it.
Yeah, absolutely. You know, I have heard sometimes, especially newer authors will talk about, you know, getting to a point where they don't need an editor, or they think that they've worked on something enough that, you know, they're really confident that it's really great. And, you know, it's not to say that those people, like, there's something wrong with them, or they're lacking something that makes them unable to see it. It's just a basic fundamental fact of humanity. It's how our brains operate. And, you know, to that point, it's the reason why even the world's most successful best-selling authors still have their books edited. They still get developmental feedback. They still get a copy editor. They still get a proofreader. Like, you may need less, you know, you may turn in a draft that's more advanced, or you may turn in a draft that's more clean and polished. But there is no real scenario in which you suddenly become, you know, so much better that you just don't need an editor anymore. Everybody needs an editor.
You know, that's interesting. I don't know if I saw this in a Facebook thread, something like that. I think it was an ad to sell whatever. I think it was an ad. And he was saying, you know, there's no difference between you and the best authors. The only difference is they know this system, and that's why they can turn in absolutely perfect first drafts. And that was my reaction. Nobody has a perfect first draft, but it was very interesting reading the comments. And a lot of people believe that they are turning in a great first draft. And I'm pretty sure that I've read some of those from indie authors. This one was, this was so awful that I sat up and wrote an absolute probably 5,000 word rant to my husband about how much I hated this book. And I wanted to like it. It was a great concept. It was the story of the man who built the cross that Jesus died on. And, you know, how does this impact him? And why is this Jewish man building crosses for the Romans? Within pages, I was just like, no, he didn't. There was not a bank in Jerusalem to take your 30 pieces of silver to. He was walking along with this, he meets this girl, and within minutes, okay, so he's this Jewish guy, she's a Jewish girl of, you know, the year 33, whatever. Within minutes, they're holding hands walking down the street. I'm
Ooh.
like, come on.
Mm.
No, they didn't. It gets better. All of a sudden, I don't remember the order, but basically she forgets that her brother's being crucified at the moment as they run off to hear Jesus speak. Right. And I'm like, wasn't your brother being crucified? Like,
Ooh, yeah, that's the kind of stuff the developmental editor catches.
oh my gosh. And the shocking thing was, I'm glad I don't remember his name. I would never deliberately embarrass another author. I don't know the name of the book. He actually was an English professor, if I remember correctly.
Right.
And I just went, how did you not do your research? How did you forget that her brother is being crucified? And how did you not do a read through and realize all these inconsistencies?
Yeah.
And I was so upset. And, I'll say if I read through my first draft after giving it a 3 or 4 week break, I'll say the same thing about myself.
Mhm.
How did you forget that?
Yeah.
Or as you said, wasn't her hair a completely different color
Yeah.
3 pages ago?
Yeah. And it's easier, excuse me, giving yourself a little time, trying, reading it back to yourself, having someone read it to you.
Right.
They're all really great techniques for catching things. But to some of the other examples you just gave about that project, like developmental editing is about the things you don't really know yet, right?
Okay, what would be some examples?
So like let's use this guy. We'll continue to use your English professor. So he's an English professor. Clearly, he's an intelligent, educated person. He's clearly read lots of books, right? It's his writing on a basic level is probably very, very advanced, right? His vocabulary is probably very, very large. His basic understanding of sentence structure and narrative is probably quite good, right? And there are plenty of people in that boat where they think, well, I'm a really good writer, or I had my high school English teacher look at it, or, they hire an editor who primarily works on newspaper articles. And they think it's all the same thing. But none of those people are going to tell you your concept is fundamentally flawed. This assumption that you're making about these two people in this relationship is not going to work for this time period. You're not taking into account, all of these types of questions. So the types of questions that you might have asked yourself, the developmental editor is going to make sure those questions have been resolved and answered. Did we think about what are the cultural norms? Is it, if it's historical fiction, you have a whole added layer that doesn't even have anything to do with story. You have the setting and the clothing and the food and all that kind of stuff. But in, speaking more broadly, talking about things like, did you start the story in the right place? Right?
That's a hard one.
That's
That
a
can be
hard
very
one.
hard.
Many times it's incredibly common that people need to kind of write their way into the story. But when you go back, the place you started writing isn't really the place that the inciting incident occurred, that the key thing that's going to set off the rest of the book is going to happen. That's where the story begins, right? It's really hard for you to see that on your own. And if you don't have a lot of experience with whatever your category is as a writer, fiction, memoir, nonfiction, whatever that looks like, assuming you're a reasonably intelligent person, there are a lot of things you would think about, but there are always going to be things you're just not accustomed to thinking about. Like from a marketing perspective, right? Who is your ideal reader? What are you giving them that they're really looking for in a book like yours? How are you addressing those things that make a book, sticky, right? That make a book engaging and captivating, that somebody can't stop reading it, or they want to tell all their friends about how awesome it was. A developmental editor not only has the objectivity, but they have the experience of usually having worked on hundreds of other books like yours to help you see the options and the different ways to get where you're trying to go.
So I regard developmental editing, that stage of my editing, as being the equivalent of wrestling an 8-armed octopus, because you notice the inconsistency, you change it here, and then you don't realize that actually impacts something that happened before. So now you catch that on the next read through. How is it to you after doing, I'm assuming, hundreds of books?
I mean, I think that's a pretty apt metaphor, actually.
Oh, shoot. I was hoping it would get
No,
better with more
I
practice.
I like that. That's pretty good. I mean, yes. So it's, it's multiple read throughs. It's being able to keep
Mhm.
all the different parts in your head. It's understanding what to look for. And I think it's a little bit, let's see, let's use a car metaphor, right? Let's use a car engine. So most people, even if you don't have a lot of experience with cars, they can hear when an engine is doing something very bad. Like,
Mhm.
bad
Mhm.
engine noises. I don't know if it's just like the result of living in a modern world, but like we all kind of instinctually understand if a noise is a bad noise coming out of your
Right, right.
so you can look under the hood and you see some smoke over here and you see that part doesn't look so great and whatever. You can figure those things out. But the developmental editor is like the mechanic. It's the person who comes and says, okay, you see smoke over there because this wire over here has become frayed and needs replacing, right?
Mhm.
You're, this, it's making this noise because this piece doesn't belong here. It belongs here, right? So it's understanding that underlying level of the mechanics, which is what an editor does. We don't just study what makes a book fun to read or enjoyable.
Mhm.
We study how do authors make the book that is enjoyable, or how do they construct the book that teaches their readers how to do this thing or how to change this part of their life. And understanding the mechanics and having someone to tell you, yes, it's true, your beta readers all said these things, I'm going to tell you what's causing those things so we
I'll
can
fix it. Yeah. What do you find are one or two or three of the top problems that people tend to have?
I think starting in the right place with every type of book, but especially with a narrative, that can be really challenging. That's a pretty common problem. I think that overwriting and underwriting, which in one sense are two totally different outcomes, but they're kind of rooted in the same issue, which is
Mhm.
fundamentally not trusting yourself to communicate to your audience. So some people go too far in one direction, they underwrite because they're wary of too much telling and not enough showing. And so we end up with no telling, okay, or like no exposition,
Mhm.
no connective tissue. And then the other side of that spectrum with the overwriting is sort of the same, as they think, okay, well, I need to make absolutely sure they understand what I'm trying to get them to understand. And so they overwrite it. They explain too much. They show so many details. In narrative, what we will often see is full scenes that are redundant. And I don't mean that the scene itself is exactly the same, but within the construction of a narrative, a scene plays a role, right? It's there to do something, to make you understand something about the character or feel something about the action that's happening. You often don't need 3 or 4 different scenes to make the same point, right? So that kind of thing happens a lot with overwriting, is they're just sort of telling you the same things in different ways because they don't really trust that it's come across.
Right.
That's super, super common. And I think the last thing that I see most commonly is a little bit of a misalignment between what the author wants to write and what's actually marketable.
Thus, indie publishing. I think that's a huge reason why people go indie.
Yes, yes. A lot of people go independently because, especially with big publishers, they really like books to be very clearly categorized. They want it to be 100% obvious. What type of book is it? Where does it go on the shelves, virtual or physical? Who exactly is the book for? And people who struggle to answer those questions in a clean and clear way will often think, okay, well, I'll just go the independent.
Mhm.
The truth there, though, is that those things still matter, even when you publish a book independently. And while you can be a little bit more flexible, you can do more cross-genre stuff. You can do things that are a little more creative and sort of what we would call breakout books that don't cleanly fit into one genre or another. But if you're not careful, you can very quickly end up with a book that might be very well written and have a beautiful cover and be well done, that doesn't sell because it doesn't connect with the readers.
Well, and I think I know a lot of authors, they just love to write. And I'm thinking of the people in my writers group. Most of them, I don't think they care if the book sells. They just love writing and they're good writers. And so they publish through Gabriel's Horn started
Mhm.
as our sort of in-house publishing house for our writers group. They were just thrilled to have a physical copy. And like I said, they're good writers. It's not that they're not, but they didn't care about selling. A lot of them were quite a bit older and they just loved to write. And they just love, going to the local book fairs or whatever. Now, I want to back up to the place to start because this, normally I don't feel like I have a lot of trouble with that. We always have to think about it. But in my first book, I really struggled with that because where he disappears out of the castle and shows up in medieval times, that's where everything changes. And I wanted to start very close to that. I wanted that to be within, the first 2, 3 chapters. But I felt so much every time I tried to move it farther up in the book, I felt like nobody cares at this point because they don't understand who he is. They
Mhm.
don't understand all the things that go into the setup of these two men switching places in time, and they're complete opposites.
Right.
So, how do you deal with something like that? Because I'm positive I'm not the only one who's faced that.
Yeah, no, that's a really common problem. I think you see it the most often with fantasy and sci-fi, I find,
Mhm,
just because the very nature of those types of books requires so much world building, and there's so much that
mhm,
you can't take for granted that you feel like you need to explain. But even in commercial fiction, this is often an issue. So there's no formula for it. It really is an art. There's a book I really love called Hooked by James Clear that I would recommend as a resource. It is all about how to hook readers with your opening chapters. It's all about beginnings. But a few things that I think are helpful. One is you have to really try hard to get yourself out of your own head. So
mhm,
a lot of times when authors are writing an opening and they struggle to start it in the right place and they keep going back because like, oh, but then you need to know this, but then that doesn't matter because you don't know this, and then you don't know this, right? A lot of that is really more about you as the author understanding how complex this is, but not being
mhm.
able to see that your reader doesn't actually need to know that yet. It's
Okay.
often a yet problem, right? You're simply giving them more than they actually need to know in this moment. And in a beginning, that's really, really important because people don't want to wade through a whole bunch of explanation, right? They want to get hooked by the
Mhm.
story. So it's a little bit
Right.
of getting yourself out of that headspace of being able to look at it and say, okay, what do they absolutely need to know to understand what's happening right now? Period.
Mhm.
Another question that you can ask yourself is, what is the inciting incident? We said that term earlier, right? So the inciting
Yep.
incident is the thing that happens. Usually it's an actual event of some kind that starts off the main plot of the story. If it's a nonfiction book, you still have a kind of inciting event in the sense of you're either talking about why you, as the author, wrote the book, what prompted your journey of writing the book. If you're writing about something you've done, the inciting incident might be the thing that started you on the journey you're writing about. Or it might be, where do I start with the reader, right? They're having this problem. Where do I step into the trajectory of that problem? Do we start talking about the problem when it first begins? Do we talk about where they are right now and they're suffering and feeling the pain of that problem? Which, by the way, sort of a trick question because that is usually the place to start. But you want to know, where does the story actually start? Not where did you start writing, but where is the point that if you begin with that point, the person will be hooked, engaged
Mhm.
enough that they both understand what kind of book they're reading, right? You're giving them a taste of what they're getting into, and also that you're giving them enough to be interested and or care enough to keep reading.
Okay. You talk on your site about how experts are writing the wrong book. How does an expert write the wrong book?
So we've touched on a little bit about the ideas of target audience and marketing and how important it is for marketing that it's really clear what your book is and who it's for. And when it comes to nonfiction, the way that you write the wrong book is that if you come from a place of, I have this thing I really want to say, I have this thing that I think people really need to hear or really need to understand. That's where a lot of people start, and it's totally normal. But at some point of the writing process, you have to be able to shift from what you want to say and what you think is important to what your target audience wants to hear and is looking for. If you can't make that shift, you end up with a book that, again, could be well written, professionally designed, in all objective ways is a good book, but it doesn't actually get you business results. Most people who have a business, most experts, are writing a book to grow their business in some way, to get more speaking gigs, to get more leads, to be better known in their niche, whatever that is. If they're not strategically aligning the book's topic with the people that they serve in their business and what those people are looking for, that's going to bring them to the book and then hopefully then design the book so it's going to bring them into their business, they'll end up with a good book that is the wrong book. And it's just going to sit there and not actually do the things that they hoped it would do.
I am working on one book right now. In fact, I'm working on about 10 books right now because I don't do well at focus. And there are actually two parts to it, and it's about our change of lifestyle from completely suburban. I think I mentioned before we actually started recording that I taught music lessons for 32 years. And so I'm used to playing a flute and playing a harp and being dressed nicely in my concert black. And now you don't really want to see under these fingernails. I've nearly been run over by the UTV. I'm in muddy clothes. I'm filthy. Every night I have to go down, get on my knees, shove my cheek up against the hay in the chicken coop and try and dig the eggs out from where the little jerks lay them. Not that I'm bitter. So it's a very different world. And I think a lot of people are doing this since 2020, especially, although I think more people before that were turning to it. And so the book is about this change of lifestyle in order to say, you know what, you can go from depending on grocery stores to being out there with the sheep every day and processing your own rabbit and growing your own garden. And so I ran it through one of the Chat GPT, Gemini, something like that, to say, what's your opinion? What's your feedback? And it's like, well, I'm not sure if this book is a memoir or a how-to, or, is it, and it threw out these 6 different potential. And so I was discussing that with my husband, and he was a fan of, well, no, you have to show how all these different aspects tie together. How politics influenced. I mean, it was political decisions that resulted in a lot of the things that happened in 2020. So how do you tie all that together? And so I'm thinking about, your ideas, what the AI had to say about what I want to write, but you make a very good point. Do people want to read all of these things mixed together with some metaphor to tie them together? Or does it need to be more focused on simply homesteading skills as we learn them? So,
yeah, no, that's an excellent example. And the point that you raised about, like, is it a memoir? Is it a how-to book? That is a tension I see very, very often, especially with people who are experienced in the business.
Mm-hmm.
They have a lifetime of wisdom to share. And so they think, let me write my story. And what they're really writing is a memoir without realizing it. They're telling the story of their journey and how they, succeeded in this career or made this life transition, right? Or, did this thing.
Mm-hmm.
That's fine, but that's one type of book.
Right.
The kind of people who read memoirs are not necessarily the same people who buy a how-to book on how to leave your suburban life and become a homesteader and grow your own food and, you know, kill your own livestock and do all of those things, right?
We prefer the term send them to freezer camp. Kill is so
Freezer
harsh.
camp. That's great. I love that. But you see, right? So you can accomplish, or you can tell your story in two very different ways, and
Right.
both of those will reach very different people. And that's where that question of what is it that you want the book to actually do for you? What is your goal with the book becomes really important. If you're really writing a memoir, what you're doing is inspiring people. You're giving people the idea. You're showing them, hey, I did this, you can do it too. But you're not actually teaching them anything. I mean, you might sort of, you know, along the way share some nuggets, but it's not instructive in the way a prescriptive book that says, hey, you've already decided to do this thing. I've done it successfully. I made a lot of mistakes. Let me share with you what worked and didn't work so that I can save you from having, you know, the same pitfalls and the same problems. Not the same book.
Right. And I'd say mine is intended to be much more memoir. It's like, you know, we've got all these how-to books all over the house, how to raise your sheep, how to butcher anything on your farm, how to, you know, whatever, how to grow pot plants, container, whatever they're called. See, I don't even know the lingo yet. Mine is not intended to be how-to. It is definitely more of a memoir. And so part of the question is, how do you write a memoir where your life has been so affected by politics without bringing politics into it? I didn't think to ask AI that, but I'd be curious what your answer is.
If politics played such an important role in the decisions that you made and the choices that you made, honestly, you can't. You're going to end up taking the heart out of your book, because people are not going to really be able to fully connect with your headspace and be able to follow you as the protagonist through the story. If they don't fully understand what led to you making those emotional choices, there's always going to be a gap, and it's just going to, like, it'll be an interesting story that people don't really get into.
I don't think I think very few people make this change of life without a very strong outside reason. I mean, some people just love nature and, you know, want to sit in rabbit poop all day, but most of us don't. And I have to say, I'm making light of it. It doesn't bother me at all. I'm curious, what kind of marketing have you found most effective? It almost sounds like the marketing starts with the production of the book itself.
In the best case scenario, you start asking these marketing types of questions before you even write the book. You really want to start by thinking about those questions. What category is this? Who is this book really for? Who is my target reader? How am I going to reach that target reader? What are they going to expect to see in my book? So yeah, you do kind of start, at least from a conversation level, you want to start it as early as possible. What the marketing of any given book looks like is going to depend heavily on your answer to those questions, right? I just did a panel earlier today about book launches, and we were talking about how important it is to make sure that you're not just copying a random template or something that you saw some best-selling author do, because chances are you don't have the same resources or the same team or the same type of book even that the people you're trying to copy from. And even though a lot of the tactics might be similar or some of the goals might be similar, book launches really need to be personalized, and it really needs to be suited to what kind of book it is, who your audience is, what your goals are, and even what your budget is, right? You know, being able to use what you have available as wisely as possible really requires looking deeper into those possible tactics. You know, I always like to say, there's no shortage of ways to market something. There's hundreds of ways to market something. The only way you're going to be able to figure out which are the best ways for you is by getting really clear about your strategy first.
And one of the services you offer is marketing, right?
Yes.
So what are some of your favorite or most effective ways that you market? Let's say someone comes to you after the book is written.
So for somebody who's written a narrative book, like a novel or a memoir, one of my favorite things to do is to leverage book promotion sites. So we'll have the book enrolled in Kindle Select, which is a program that Amazon runs that you can join or not join. It's a 90-day commitment at a time. And if you join Kindle Select, you are agreeing to have your ebook exclusively be with Amazon for that 90-day period. But in exchange, you access to a number of up to 5 freebie days, 5 days that you can pre-schedule your ebook to be available for free. Now, a lot of people have sort of witnessed this tactic without fully understanding what they're seeing. When you see authors running giveaways on Amazon, that's usually what's happening. They've made the ebook available for free. But the other piece is the book promotion site. You have to advertise the giveaway, otherwise nobody's going to come and get the book.
Right.
So there are dozens and dozens of these sites. BookBub is the largest and perhaps the most well-known because they were the first. And now we've got dozens and dozens of copycats, different, organizations that are essentially following the same model at different tiers. So you can spend anywhere from $10 to, $500. There's lots.
Oh, way more than that.
Even way more than I'm talking about, like on a single promotion site, right?
Okay.
Like there are lots of different options. There's a huge range of places, and they all tend to specialize in different types of books. So being able to put together a promotion where we'll take those 5 freebie days and map out a strategy of which sites we think that the author should promote those freebie days on, and then using the pattern of when those days occur to hopefully jumpstart Amazon's algorithm, the famous algorithm
that controls our lives,
controls everything. And the goal is to try to encourage the algorithm to start giving the book organic exposure, the kind that you can't buy. So those promo sites is often why, you can see authors who announce that they've reached #1 as a category bestseller, or they're ranking #1 in some category. They're usually using some combination of promo sites and giveaways to make that happen. And it is very effective. And we have used it very successfully with all of our clients.
I used dumb luck. I happened to write a time travel story set in Scotland at the same time Diana Gabaldon was big. And I had never heard of her. So the first time I ever heard of her was when people started asking, did you copy Diana Gabaldon's idea into an author? Of course, that's anathema. I did not copy anybody.
Right.
But so for me, that was, people stumbled on it, and I did a blog tour, which helped a lot, but I've done future blog tours that didn't. So I'm curious about your input to this. Somebody told me marketing techniques go through fads like anything else, and they said what works 1 year doesn't work 2 years later. Is that your experience?
I think that's entirely true. I mean, it's sort of like a yes and kind of situation. Certainly some tactics become more popular. Sometimes things become overused or overdone, and then people have to move on. Sometimes things are really trendy, and then people realize, oh, it doesn't actually work as much as we hoped that it would work. But there are time-tested things that will always work, right? The fundamental mechanism of a book promotion site is just buying access to a mailing list of the right people. What we call them and the ways that we do that might change, but it's never going to be true that reaching the right people in mass quantities doesn't help sell books, right? Like that's always going to work. That doesn't go out of style. So book trailers may be an example of something that was a huge fad, a few years back, right? Everybody thought they needed a book trailer. Everybody wanted a book trailer. What actually happened is that a few publishers created book trailers that went viral. And everybody who saw the ones that went viral thought, oh, well, if I create one, it'll go viral too, and then I'll have the same success. But in reality, book trailers, while they can be effective, book trailers work when you have a large platform. So something can't go viral if you only have 7 people viewing it in the first place.
Yes.
Right?
So
if you don't already have a platform to start with, and if you don't invest properly in creating the book trailer. It's not just a random video, right? It's like creating any kind of piece of content. There's a skill to crafting that content in a way that makes people interested in the book and gets them to take the action of clicking through to read about it. So if you're not doing those things, you're probably not really going to benefit from book trailers. And in fact, that's kind of what happened. Everybody wanted a book trailer. Now the industry's kind of cooled and you don't see too many people asking for them anymore.
Right. So I think that you said you are working on writing your first book that's not ghostwritten. What is that about?
It's called The Author Advantage. It is written specifically for nonfiction authors, so experts, coaches, consultants, speakers, etc., who are writing a book specifically as part of their business growth plans. They've heard that a business needs a book, that a book can help them to achieve any number of growth goals, and that is true. My book is more specifically targeted to people who have already published that book. So they heard the advice, everyone told them they needed it, they published the book, and now they have no idea what to do with it. It's just sitting there, gathering virtual dust in their Zoom background, and they're wondering why they put so much time and energy and money into creating this thing that does not actually magically attract opportunities. So the Author Advantage book is going to be a playbook that, first of all, helps them to understand some of those marketing questions that they hopefully asked of themselves early in the process, offers a little bit of triage advice if they didn't, how you can fix some things. And the bulk of the book is around 9 of the most common and effective strategies for leveraging your book to achieve different objectives.
Okay. When is that coming out?
Hopefully by the end of the year or very early next year.
Okay, very good. Do you have any plans, given you majored in creative writing, to write novels or anything else that's not nonfiction?
Yeah, I'm always playing with fiction on the back end, but running my business takes up a lot of my creative energy.
What kind of themes do you like in fiction that you would like to write or have played around with?
I am always really fascinated by family dynamics and relationship dynamics in particular. I find, the books that there's like strong friendships involved, or there's family drama, or something going on like that. I think it's so endlessly interesting the ways that people connect with each other or fail to connect with each other, the way that the relationships in our lives make us who we are. Really reflect back.
And I think in a way
yourselves.
That's right. That's, I think, almost fundamental to any good story, even beyond those family drama, that genre. I mean, I think this is one of the things that has stood out to people about my books, is that it's not just time travel, but that it focuses so much on the relationships and how we treat each other and why that matters and how it destroys or builds relationships. So I thought, since, the title of the program is Step Into a Story, I would take away my usual medieval pub that I'm usually sitting in and put up a scene and ask you, what story would you write about this scene?
Well, it's funny that you chose this, because the novel that I have been toying with for quite some time is a pirate romantasy novel.
Fantastic. So tell me about it. Does his ship sink, or is this a portal to another world?
Well, speaking of the inciting incident, that's where I started. So I started this story with this kind of, idea or vision, if you will, of a woman pirate captain and her crew coming upon a shipwreck, and there being only 2 survivors, which they haul aboard. And both of the survivors have a secret, different secrets.
I love that premise. I wanted to look up really quick. Do you know who the first, possibly only American female pirate is? Or was?
Tell me.
Her name is Anne Bonny,
Oh,
and
sure.
she was in the 1600s. I'm just seeing if I can find, I interviewed an author who wrote a fictionalized version of her life, but it was a really neat book, and I really enjoyed hearing about it. And she wasn't a pirate for very long. She ended up getting caught. And so what happens in your book, and how far are you into it?
I have been spending a lot of time playing with backstory and world building and character biographies. I have mapped out a few scenes, but I have not actually started writing it. I'm having too much fun just coming up with ideas.
That's the part my husband does. And in fact, that's why I'm working on 10 books at once. Actually, it's probably more like 12. He has so much fun coming up with all these ideas over dinner and drinks. And I'm like, stop it. I'm already trying to write the last 6 books you came up. But that is the fun part. The wrestling the 8-armed octopus is not the fun part.
No, it is not. It is the most important part, but not the fun part for sure.
Right. So where can people find you online?
Well, we have a wonderful library full of free resources for authors of all kinds at our website, thewritersally.com. You go to the website, you'll see right up there, there's a tab for library, and you can go through there to our blog, to our resources, which are videos and documents and downloads and a bunch of stuff there. I also do a monthly Ask Me Anything session that is only open to members of my list. So you can join the list there and get the invitation for next month.
Very nice. People can find me at booksandbrews.net, where we have a whole bunch more interviews with authors. You can find my books at laurabosica.com. Our sponsor is Gabriel Sorn at gabrielsornpress.com. Lots of great authors there, including Dan Blum and Rebecca May Hope. And you can find our farm animals and our little proof machines out in the rabbit house at glenmerrillfarms.wordpress.com. I'm actually starting to put up more articles on it, but most of my articles you can actually find at bluebellstrilogy.blogspot.com. So I don't like to get bored. I think I did just mention I'm a little bit ADHD, so I have about 100 sites out there. So thank you very much for being a part of Step Into a Story, and I'm excited to have authors come and hear your advice.
Awesome. Thank you so much for having me. It's been a blast.